Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our April budget hearing. Hope everyone had a nice and relaxing spring break. So for now, can I just get a motion for the board to enter into a special meeting? Ms. Levitan, seconded by Mr. Greco. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, can everyone please stand for the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please take a seat. Okay, and now we'll have Dr. Rufo to deliver the third of the four budget presentations for the 2025-2026 school year. And following the presentation, the board will be presented with a resolution to adopt the proposed budget and the accompanying property tax report card. Dr. Rufo, all yours.
Good evening and welcome to our third presentation on the 25-26 budget. Several months ago, when we started the budget season or the budget presentation season, I mentioned that it was looking like it was going to be a tough budget year, and it certainly delivered on that. Tonight we're going to go over the overall budget, some things that have changed since I last presented, and so updates and changes to the tax cap and to the budget, as well as updates for revenue. So the budget climate is challenging this year. It's been challenging the last couple of years. This year, probably the most challenging. We've had increases in some significant increases. Health insurance, we've continued to have inflationary increases, and some of these inflationary increases we've been feeling. The price of paper, the price of books and materials, and those kind of hit you right away through the inflation. When inflation started ticking up. And then we have some longer term contracts that we're seeing kind of the catch up and experiencing that now. We have increases in our liability insurance, and we've had that for a couple of years, and it continues. And that's related to some environmental catastrophes that have happened not only in our area, but other areas that impact insurance market. Certainly on Long Island, the CVA cases and some of those very large settlements have worked their way into insurance premiums. We are experiencing with our transportation contracts. We'll talk a little bit about it. We're still in negotiations, but we have to adopt a budget tonight. So we'll talk a little bit about what's included in the budget for transportation, along with some changes in direction that we'll talk about. And we've been dealing with enrollment growth over the last 10 years, and we continue to see shifts, and we have changing and growing instructional needs. All that in a climate of uncertainty regarding state aid. The state aid is a couple of weeks late, but again, we have to adopt our budget, so we have to go with the latest information that we have and move forward. So at this point in time, we have, and despite those challenges, we were able to bring in the budget slightly, $67,000 $1,000 under the tax cap of 2.80. So the proposed tax levy increase is 2.77. The calculated tax cap is 2.8. We're looking at a budget-to-budget increase of about 3.53%. And to the left, I would just remind everyone that it's, the 14th year or so, or 13th or 14th of the tax cap, and we've remained under the tax cap to a cumulative amount of about 11 million. And in some years, though, we were under by over $1 million. And in these more recent years, with all the inflationary pressures and the cost escalations, it's become more and more difficult to even get close to that gap. But we're pleased that we were able to deliver those budget numbers while not impacting our program, which is always the primary goal of the budget season. So I just wanted to walk through a little bit about the change in the tax cap. The tax cap is not final until the board adopts the budget, so we know there's always a possibility for some change. And the only change you're going to see from the March presentation of 2.5 to 2.8 was the increase in the coming year exemptions, or what are called capital exemptions. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, and that is for the equipment in the transportation, the proposed bus purchase. So just in terms of the program, when I presented in March, I mentioned that we were just underway with our staffing meetings, and those have been concluded. So we didn't have a big, certainly there were shifts among codes, but overall we're about where we started. If you look from on the right-hand side, if you can see it, and this will all be posted, you have the current year FTEs versus the proposed, and so we're up a little bit. We talked about the special ed area last time. We're also this year, in this version, increasing our psychologist line by 0.5, again, based on student needs. And we also have an allocation, which I'll talk about in a minute, for transportation, an increase for bus drivers. We have finalized our list of projects. There are no new projects up there. Some of them were modified a bit, but this is the projects that are going to be included into the proposed budget. It's the HBT tennis court renovation, including 2 new courts, staff bathroom renovations for ADA compliance. We have included an upgraded sound and lighting system at our secondary auditoriums, and then district-wide projects, electrical, roofing, masonry, and paving projects. And we're going to be doing some walkways and classroom alterations. And these are smaller scale projects than what's being completed as part of the bond work. And that amount, the allocation, remains the same as last year, 4.325. Transportation. So we have, in our transportation area, we have 2 codes. The first is the one presented, 5510. That's called District Transportation Services. So that's the in-house staff that we have that supports education, supports transportation. So we have our transportation supervisor that does the routing, a dispatcher, and the like. And most of our expenses are in the next line item, which is contracted transportation. And so that's where our contracts are with Huntington Coach and with the other coach bus companies that we contract with to provide transportation services for our students. And our transportation in the district is complicated, as you can see in the left-hand corner. We have lots of buses, and we call them vans. They're really small buses, and we need a lot of small buses also to get into some of our neighborhoods that you can't fit a large bus. And we do many runs. We do early morning runs. Each of the schools have their own run. Then we have after-school runs, late buses, and athletic runs. And then, of course, we do all of the private school runs. And our first run starts at 6:30, and we don't wind up ending it until the 6 o'clock late bus for athletics. So we've talked about contracted transportation and how that it typically works, that the district did an RFP or bid back in 2017-18, and we're in the process of doing one now. And again, we are still negotiating that, but we have included an allocation in the budget because we're required to adopt the budget tonight. And one of the areas that the district has been thinking about has been about the purchase of buses. And we have, and this is a change in direction for us, because we have contracted pretty much 100% of our buses. And the experience, I guess, of contracting out, there are advantages to that, but there's also advantages to having some control over cost escalations and some control over some routes. So we have done an analysis of a bus purchase. Actually, 2 buses, like the one you see up there, a large bus, and then a small bus. And what the data shows is that it is cost effective through state aid reimbursement. That's about 36%. We would break even, assuming that the buses last 10 years, many last longer than that we would save money in the end by moving in this direction for routes, like for all of our field trips that we do, for our athletic after-school routes that we do, and might be a possibility of picking up one of our other routes to maximize use of the bus and to provide a more cost-effective solution. The district has been having conversations about this. When we did our last negotiations with the CSEA, we included in the collective bargaining agreement a salary schedule for drivers, for bus drivers. So that was contemplated. So those 3 vehicles are included in this year's budget as well. So just wanted to spend a moment just on clarification of the way the budget is structured and the relationship between the budget and the tax levy. So that top line number, $295,822,420,000, is the proposed budget. And that's our expenditure plan for all of the goods and services that are delivered by the district. And then to get to the tax levy, which is the amount that is distributed by Nassau County among the taxpayers, is the tax levy. That's the number at the bottom. So we start at the budget, and then we take out state aid. The number that I've taken out was from the executive proposal. We then reduce the budget amount by our local revenue, which I'll describe in the next slide. And then we have consistently used our reserves to help bring down the tax levy. So we propose to appropriate about $2.9 million to bring the levy down even further, and then an additional use of our restricted reserves to a level of $9.1 million to bring us to the tax levy that is up there. So the state aid number has not changed since we presented in March. It's the $35 million aid number, and that is we get directly off of the state runs. I have modified it for 2 items. One is building aid. We have lots of building projects, and we're closing them out. Some of those closeouts are not known yet by the state, but we know they're going to close, and we can approximate the aid that's going to come in next year, so we include that. We also will be doing some end-of-year BOCES projects that were included in this budget, but we took them out and said made more sense to do this year. And we will have received, as you know, we get about 50% on our, between 45 and 50% aid on the purchases that we make, mostly technology purchases through BOCES. So I've accounted for that there as well. One of the concerns, or one of the conversations that's going on about state aid right now is that the CPI has dropped since the executive budget proposal, and that might impact school districts. There's also, these numbers are just not final, so we can't really, again, we can't count on it, but we have to make a choice and we have to move forward. We don't have the luxury of extending. And then we have local revenue. So local revenue, the sources up there account for about 5% of our revenue. And the largest component of our local revenue is pilots, payments in lieu of taxes. And those are Nassau County, mostly Nassau County pilots, as well as LIPA pilots. And for the 25-26 school year, I don't know if you can see it at the bottom, again, this will be posted, we're projecting an increase in local revenue of about 5.3%, about $700,000, and that's mostly driven by the addition of one pilot that is coming on in the 25-26 school year. Also of note, second line item, tuition, there's a little bump up in tuition, really just adjusting to actuals this year, and that's for students, tuition for special education students that are attending our program from other districts. We have also interest on our investments is $2.6 million. And our unclassified revenue, most of it, they're small items, but they also include the premiums that we receive on our TANs, as well as prior period adjustments from BOCES. BOCES does an estimate of services, and then they sort of true up all of their numbers, and districts in many years get a refund if their expenses come in under their estimates. So this year, as in many others, most others, we will continue to use our reserves to support the budget and help manage the tax levy. And up in the first box are the 5 reserves that we have been using to stabilize the levy. And what I mean by stabilize the levy is we use our reserves that are designated for specific purposes. Our practice has been to take the increases, if there are increases in expenses, and we use the reserves to offset them, that protects the levy. So therefore, your levy doesn't necessarily go up when the expense goes up. The reserves serve as a buffer to that. And so for the 25-26 budget, we are proposing to use about $9.1 million. And that's about $2 million, an increase of about $2 million from the prior year. And most of it is driven by, some of it is driven by expense. ERS expense is up, workers' comp is up, so all these expenses are going up. But it's also driven by an additional allocation for our TRS reserve. And that TRS reserve is to, again, to close our budget gap. And we talked about this at the last meeting, that if we needed to close the gap, we would likely turn to our TRS reserve as a way to do that. And the reserves that we've identified up here, and up in so the philosophy with the reserves are we use them to protect, to balance, to offset the levy, but we also, the other side to that is you have to be mindful that that if you use them and you continue to use them, you have to consider replenishing them, and you also have to have a long-term focus. And the reserve balance, also in the corner, for last year, so audited financial statements last year, was about $31 million. So that $9 million represents about 30%. So that is an increase, but the reason that we have our reserves is to get us through difficult budget times and to protect the levy. And so that's the rationale for increasing that reserve, because if The purpose of them is to assist in difficult times, and it is difficult. And the reserves are also, they're not hidden. Our reserves are published in our audit report. We consult with our auditors on the use of reserves, and we also submit them, the amount we're going to use each year, on our property tax report card. The reserves are also helpful to us, particularly in years because they impact our credit rating, and particularly in a year where we're going out for our bonds, when that happens. It's important to have healthy reserves, and we do. And so we've appreciated that the board has allowed us, even to establish the TRS reserve, which is one of the newer reserves that was created, I think, in 20 or 21. And another, I would call it an unrestricted reserve. We call it our fund balance, and it is the amount, 4%. We are allowed by law to retain 4% of the subsequent year's budget, and that is for a cushion against unforeseen financial events that occur, and we've certainly had those. We've had them with COVID, emergency projects, boilers, and things that we've had to do, and we've relied on our fund balance for that. And so for the 25-26 school year, we're looking to use a consistent amount with the 24-25 of $2.9 million. So this is the property tax report card, and this is filed within 24 hours from the board adopting the budget, and it provides all of the information, not in detail, but just high level, the amount of the budget, the tax levy, as well as, again, this is very small. This is your statement of your reserve balances and how much of the reserves you plan to use to support the budget. And so these numbers are reflective of the numbers in the presentation. And our next meeting is May 12th. That's the budget hearing. And then during that meeting, we'll do a highlight of all the items that are in the budget and hopefully an update to state aid, although the budget is set as soon as we submit the property tax report card.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Ruffo, for that comprehensive presentation. Are there any questions from the board? Ms. Edmondson and then Mr. Rotolo.
Thank you so much. I know how hard this year is, and I can't tell you how impressed I am at the work you guys have done to keep our programming and stay under the tax levy. It's just incredible, but I just had a few questions that I wanted to ask about, and one of them is about the busing. You said you put in a number for the transportation costs because we're still negotiating. Is that a worst case scenario number? Is the number you think you'll arrive at after negotiations? And what happens when we have a firmer number to the community for tax purposes? And then I have another question after.
I've included an allocation that I think will cover our scenario. The second part of that question was, and what happens if we negotiate something?
Yeah, you think that's the most likely outcome number? Is that my understanding?
I think I don't want to give too much away in terms of negotiations. So it's hard for me to say what is most likely.
I understand that. Okay, that's fine. And regarding the purchase of the buses, which I think is a good idea to prevent the situation we're in going forward. You said break even in 3 years. Does that include like service contracts and insurance? I think you said the drivers were included in the DL, or is it just the base cost for the bus?
Yeah, the determination of break even includes all of the anticipated operating costs. So that includes drivers, estimates of replacement parts, supplies, DOT inspections 4 times a year, all of insurance. We reach out to our insurance company for estimates. So it includes all of those operating costs.
Thank you. I don't want to be repetitive, but I want to thank you, Dr. Rufo, and your accounting team, and Dr. Rogers and the cabinet for putting together this budget with so many uncertain variables in it, which is very difficult to do. I just want to point a couple of things out, and I have some questions too, is 14 years under the tax cap straight without reducing any of our class sizes. We haven't reduced any of our clubs. We've kept all our programs in place, including special ed, our AP, our science research. We've been able to add teachers. We've been able to add mental health professionals with increased in enrollment, which is not an easy task to do. And this takes financial discipline, prudent and conservative budget planning, which is, again, hard to do with all these variables. And this is not the case. I want to point out I'm also on the Nassau-Suffolk School Board Association, and this is not the case with other districts where they're actually laying off teachers, redistricting, closing schools, reducing the increasing student class sizes. So I think I'm very proud, and all of you should be proud on all of these accomplishments that the district has done. And we've increased in our national, state, and local ranking. Very important. This is not a given that this just all happens by luck. My questions are, for the unrestricted funds, there are unrestricted aid, you had said it was 4%. I know that there was a potential increase in that number. Do you know what happened with that, or is that going to go up? The percentage.
The 4%?
The unrestricted, that we can keep.
Our reserve, yeah.
Right.
Not aid.
The reserve, correct.
Yep, my understanding is that that did not move forward.
Okay. And then you had also brought up our CPI adjustment. What is, can you elaborate on that?
So I may struggle a little with the numbers. I think when they ran the executive budget, it was the CPI has come down a couple of tenths or so, maybe a little bit more, not a half, maybe a quarter of a percentage point. And that the concern is, will that impact the aid that districts were given as part of the executive budget? There's uncertainty around that because if any of the formulas or anything else changed. It's really, there are moving parts and it's hard to predict. But I just wanted to throw that out there just to make you aware, because it's something that the business officials and others are concerned about.
And was that related to the new calculation for poverty in the Rockefeller study, or is that separate?
My understanding is this particular discussion, it was not related to that. It was related to the change from January to now.
Okay. And then my final question was related to the state funding and federal funding. Do we have any idea on what direction that, I know it's completely, we don't know yet, but do we have any idea where that's going, or if there's going to be any shortfalls there for us?
I won't put Dr. Rufo on the spot for that. I would say, working from broadest to narrowest, right now we have not seen any reductions in federal funding, but I also just rhetorically have not heard a lot of encouraging news from Washington about necessarily increases in federal funding. So as we're looking to the long term, I'm not anticipating that we'll see increases from Washington. I think the opposite is more likely than increases. The second question for the state is, again, challenging to predict the future, but here's the data that goes into the prediction. This has been a better year than expected for the state because Wall Street Revenues on bonuses were better than expected for New York State, and New York State is heavily dependent on the personal income tax, and in turn, the personal income tax in New York is heavily dependent on revenues from Wall Street. So because the fiscal year ending December 30th was so positive, there was a bump in the equities markets at the end of the year. The state enjoyed a little revenue surge. That's the revenue surge that they're contemplating spending right now. But if equities markets remain where they are right now, I think the opposite will happen at the end of this year. So and obviously there's 3 quarters left in the calendar year, so it's certainly possible for things to change between now and December. But if equity markets remain weak, then I think we'll see the state's revenue picture also appear weak. And so I wouldn't anticipate generous increases in state aid if the state's fiscal picture worsens over the course of the next 3 quarters.
Thank you. Mr. Greco?
Thank you, Dr. Ruffo. I'm not going to be repetitive, but I agree with what was said about you and your team earlier. With respect to the $632,000 that was added from the presentation in March, is that solely with respect to the purchase of the 3 buses? There's nothing else in there?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Ruffo, the last 3 years of the budgeting that we've had to do, can you sort of give me a sense of how difficult this year compared to last year, compared to the year before, has been, sort of trying to get a sense of, hey, this has been a tough time, but how tough do I think about this year versus last year, and the last 3 years in the context of your experience?
I think that 2002-03 stands out as a very difficult because we had some surge. And in the years that we have surges in enrollment is become challenging from a standpoint of you've set a budget and then you have to, you have more children to educate. So and we always try to make sure that, and we're hopeful that in some years, while there's increases in one area, maybe you get a saving somewhere else. And that was a particularly difficult year because we had increases in health insurance, and, everything seemed to be falling the wrong way. So that stands out. Last year was, we had savings in several areas. So that, in my mind was a better year. This year is a challenging year because we had some uncertainties and some things that were unknown. And so those are what become the challenges once the budget is set. And I think that in the last several years prior to that, we had some increases in state aid. We talked about how we got those bumps for 3 years to sort of get us to where we should have been all along. And so that helped us, pushed us through some of those really difficult years that a lot of other districts were experiencing. So I think that the challenge is, how I started out with the inflationary pressures, the health insurances, and those kinds of things, have created more difficulty, in addition to the state aid uncertainty. And that sort of continues.
So, in many ways, right, this is a rainier year than the rainy years we've had in the last few. Do we have a sense from the 2025 actuals? I know the year's not over, right? We have 2 more months. Am I giving bad feedback, right? Do we have a sense where our 2025 actual general fund reserves and restricted balances are going to end up?
Yeah.
Not an absolute number,
Yeah.
but let's just say higher or lower from where we were, say, in '24.
Will be several million lower than 24. That's what I predict. Again, it's still, even though it's April, We work on a system of encumbrances where a lot of money is in encumbrances and they are in purchase orders that by the end of the year, sometimes those money falls from them, and then other times, it looks like we need more on this one, so it moves in the other direction. So I would say that this year will be several million short from where we were. Yes, short meaning less left over, not short deficit.
Got it. So in a sense, the general fund restricted reserves and balances were, I don't know, 55.5 million at the end of '24, according to the audit. And by the end of '25 fiscal, they'll probably be in the 52, 53, not a couple $1 million lower.
Yeah.
So we've been drawing down on the fund balances and restricted reserves this year.
Yes, and I look at it slightly different than this 50, although you're correct because you're including capital. To me, I don't consider capital because I think that is spoken for, and I don't consider that. I mean, all of the reserves are restricted in the way that you use them, but what I can use in the budget in the out years going forward is, I would say, that 30 million. But to your point, at the end of this year, we would be, because we're using 7 million for this year, and then we're not going to be replenishing, it's very unlikely that we would be replenishing the amount that we're using this year.
Okay,
So that
so-
there would be a decrease.
So it's unlikely even this year as well, with the 9 million that we're allocating to the budget. It's hard to say even further in advance, but it's probably even more challenging to replenish reserves this year at the end of 26.
Yes.
Okay, so this is the rainy day that the capital funds, the reserve funds are designed for, where we're drawing against to protect against cuts to program or anything like
Yes.
that. Dr. Rogers, there are a number of districts that have a target for their general fund expense per year and having a level of reserves in terms of projecting and targeting the ending balances of reserves. So for example, I know in Plainview, they have a 20% target of their general fund expenses to reserve on their balance sheet for just such emergencies. Have we given any thought, or has the board given any thought to providing guidance about the pluses and minuses of that kind of system? And do you have some thoughts that you can share with us? Because maybe it's a chance for us to direct you.
I think on a question that significant, I would want some time to wrestle with that thought and maybe look at some neighbors. 20% sounds like a really big number. For us, that number would be, in the neighborhood of 50 million, which is about where we're at right now for reserves. But as Dr. Rufo said, 9 of that is capital reserves. We've had capital reserves as much as 20 million at one point. We spent those reserves in, pretty much they were exhausted by 2017-18, and that was to pay for phase 1 and part of phase 2 and avoid some borrowing costs for the school district. So our balances, in 2014-15 when I got here, the balance was about where it is right now, somewhere in the neighborhood of 50, low 50, 51, 52, somewhere. By the time we got to 17-18, we had exhausted about 20 million by spending it on capital. So we were down in the low 30s. Since then, we've built back up again. So now you've got 10 years of inflation in there, plus an additional 9 million replenishing the capital reserve, again, to be used. The board's going to use at least half of that for the bond project that that the voters just approved. So I guess question number 1 is, without knowing anything about Plainview, is their number inclusive of capital or exclusive of capital? I think the second question would be, what are the reserves for? Are they designed to meet some sort of other spending target? So I would want to think about, if you're going to have a maximum or a minimum reserve, then you would also want to have some guidance for how you would use that reserve and under what circumstances. So I wouldn't want to give you my first thought on that. I would want to give you my best thought on that.
So another way to think about this is, I'm trying to get a sense from you in terms of what are the level of reserves that and this may be too soon to answer, but we need to retain for you to feel that our program is safe, as opposed to we're in a rainy day, we've had a number of difficult budget years, we just passed a big financing package of bonds for capital projects. The question is there more room for us to draw down our reserves this year, because there is some level where you feel comfortable that we can stop because that's enough protection for the program? Or is there any kind of guidance that you can give us in terms of we can provide you a framework about how to think about pulling reserves down during rainy periods and replenishing them during sunny periods?
So without necessarily creating hard and fast rules, I think what we did in this budget was recognize that this was going to be a difficult budget year. And for all the times that I've worked for all the time that I've worked for this board and of all the board members that I've worked for here, one thing has been consistent. Folks recognize the program as the reason for Syosset's excellence, preserve the program, always have a long-term focus, and I certainly hear that in your question, having a long-term focus for us, and address the emerging challenges that we see. So we did see, obviously, the challenge of the pandemic, the immediate enrollment surge post-pandemic. Now we're seeing a lot of the uncertainty in the marketplace as being a challenge, and the potential revenue side. So as challenging as this year is, I worry that subsequent years will be more challenging for the reasons I stated earlier. It seems more likely than not that the federal government will be less generous, not more generous, with school districts. It seems more likely than not that the state government will have less revenue to work with than it has in the current year. It seems more likely than not that insurance companies are still going to experience large losses and pass those costs along to school districts. It seems more likely than not that if equity markets suffer, the benefit funds, the pension funds, the TRS and ERS, will seek to recover their losses in the market from the employers that they hold the pensions for. So all of those things suggest to me that as challenging as this year was, the next several years may be more challenging. So my advice would be not to use more reserves in the present because you'd want to preserve program in the future. So we've given you our best recommendation for how to balance that. We're certainly thinking about this with an eye towards the future, and not just next year's future, but 3-4 years out future as far as we can see. And we've tried to use the reserves to, as Dr. Rufo said, mitigate the impact to the levy. And one way that I've been thinking about the increase in use of reserve from 7 million range to the 9 million range for this year is 1 million of that essentially is a one-time use of a reserve to make a one-time purchase of buses. And once we make that one-time purchase of buses, those buses will result in savings. Once we break even, for every year after that, those buses will be savings for the school district. So to me, that's a good use of the reserve because it's an investment that will yield savings in the long-term future. So I would say to you that we are thinking about the future. I've given you my best estimate of where that good balance point is between managing this year's cost to the taxpayer and making sure that the out years also have some reserves to rely on as well.
Ms. Ostrich, do you have any more questions, or are you done?
I don't want to, I'll come back. I don't want to monopolize.
Okay, Ms. Falco.
So not to be repetitive, but I do want to thank you because I know this year was incredibly challenging. It's been challenging financial times for people in general, and school district is certainly no different. They have the same exposure to all the same things that people do. So thank you. I know it was really tough, and you guys do an amazing job. Just in response to Jack's point about putting in guidelines, it sounds to me like flexibility, allowing you guys to have flexibility is usually important. So you can look at the budget and plan for, this is not only a tough time this year, but tough times next year. And if we give you a specific number of what you have to maintain or what you have to have, then it doesn't allow you to have the flexibility that you guys may need for your expertise. And I know how hard you guys work, and you guys have such an expertise at playing with the numbers and figuring out the best way to utilize the money we have and the funds we have coming in, that it sounds like the flexibility is really, giving you guys flexibility is really to our benefit and the school district's benefit, to allow you guys to, use your expertise in the area and make the money work the best way it can.
I think that the way we've tried to work with the board is to be transparent in the decisions that we're making, so that you're sharing in that flexibility with us, and you have certainly the opportunity to direct us if you see the choices that we're making may not exactly reflect the priorities that the board has. You know the decisions that led up to those choices, you're able to see the impact of those choices, and you're able to redirect us if you want us to be redirected. So, I see value in both approaches. What we've done for the 11 years that I've been here is to try and be as transparent and how we go about that, and to work as closely with you, and hopefully take away from our conversations a distillation of your priorities, and then reflect that back in what we bring back month after month as we continue to refine the budget.
Mr. Greco.
So it's funny, I listened to what Mr. Ostrich said, and I had my way of massaging it, and then I heard what Ms. Belkov said, and I actually think it's in line with what I would recommend. And obviously this is not for today, it's maybe something you can get back to us on. But the idea of not necessarily having a target for reserves as a percentage, but having goalposts, whether it be 25% and 15% be the two goalposts. So if we start to get close to the 15, you can start to make sure you overfund at the end of each year, versus if you start to get into that 25% range, you could start to think about passing some of those dollars back to the community. And I actually think that may be, those numbers I'm just throwing out there, by the way, those are not legitimate numbers. But that may not be a bad way to do it, because then it could put some of the onus on us as a collective to come up with those numbers, obviously with your guidance, and sort of put something in place that may be a better way to sort of, track how this is going over time, where we don't have to have this discussion year after year.
Ms. Abramson?
Just want to clarify what Brian was saying. You mean to have the target as an alert versus a hard and fast rule?
Yeah, so they wouldn't even be target. So a target would be stay around 20%. I'd be saying take a number high, take a number low, try to stay in between, and as you get close to one of those numbers, the sort of our guidance to the administration would be to try to pull back away from that number and don't let it blow past it.
So I would say I agree with having a threshold of alert, but I wouldn't say necessarily that when they are there that we have to look at it and say, oh, you have to stop and go the other way. We would have to look at the circumstances, why we're there and why we have to use it. I think that it's good to have a threshold where you're like, oh, we're getting a little low, and we discuss why we're there, and we discuss what it means to go below there or not to go below there, or what we lose in the process. But I think it's a good marker, not a hard and fast rule.
Luckily, it'll never be hard and fast, because we'll be doing this every year, but it would give them the opportunity to explain, hey, we're getting close, this is why we decided to do, based on your guidance from X number of years ago.
Dr. Rogers, the buses that we're thinking of buying, are they going to be compliant with the new set of rules that may or may not be coming down the road from New York State? I think, if I remember right, one of the reasons we've been hesitant in the past, other than managing a workforce, is that we were worried about buying buses that were going to become obsolete. I'm curious to hear the change in thinking, and I have a lot of thoughts on buses. So.
I have a lot of thoughts on buses too, none of them good. So two things. One, even within the, districts are not allowed to buy diesel buses under the current statute after 2027. And then those are still allowed to have, I believe, a 10-year life to 2037. So we're 2 years ahead of when the state would restrict us from purchasing such a bus. So we talked about maybe this is an opportunity for the district to buy its first electric bus. But I think we have a lot of reservations about the technology, the weight of the bus, the charging infrastructure needed for the bus. The bus costs $400,000 instead of $250,000. And the deeper we got into it, the less likely it seemed that the bus was going to be useful for our needs. The other thing with the buses is the buses save us money when they're running. They don't save us money when they're charging. So diesel buses can run it, indefinitely, just keep putting gas in the tank and the thing just keeps going. So if you can get 8 runs a day out of that bus, 4 morning runs, 3 afternoon runs, and 2 athletics runs and a late bus, that bus is covering a lot for you. So what is the change in thinking? We've actually talked a couple of times about buying buses in the past and have kind of walked away from it. But I think the lines have finally crossed with what we've experienced with our transportation RFP this year, where the advantages of having all of our busing managed externally are dwindling as the costs have increased. And I think we've reached a point where economically it makes sense for us to run the buses ourselves. And while there's a headache associated with running the buses ourselves, the economic payback is going to make the headache worth it. So I feel that this is a good decision. We watched our neighbor to the west go through a similar plan over the course of the last 11 years or so, where they started out with just 2 buses of their own, in fact, the same buses that we're planning on buying, and have slowly increased the size of their fleet. So they now have a fleet that is 2/3 externally managed and 1/3 internally managed, and it provides them with some flexibility, some control over cost escalation without having to own the entire enterprise. So I'm not saying that that's where we should go altogether, because for us, what we'll do with these first couple of buses is we will take I'm going to use the wrong term, but it'll make sense, the highest profit routes and keep them for ourselves so that our buses are returning the most savings possible. At some point, the next routes will not be as cost effective, and then the next routes after that will be less cost effective, and at some point it doesn't make sense anymore. But for these first 3 buses, we will cherry pick the 3 best things that we can do with them to save the absolute most money.
This progresses in a hybrid fashion until you get to the point where you're saying your supply-demand lines cross and the marginal utility is down and it's not worth. There's not incremental cost savings unless there's some kind of meaningful shift that we can't anticipate. The problem is we only have a finite amount of time to execute, right?
Yeah. Right now, knowing that we're going to break even in 3 years on an item that should last us 10 years, it's a no-brainer. At some point, what I think will happen is we'll do this calculation again next spring, and we'll say if we buy 2 more buses, the break even on them is 4 years, but that's still worth it for a 10-year life. And then maybe the year after that, it'll be a 7-year break even, and we say to ourselves, I don't know, maybe not worth it. But we'll have to see how the contract evolves over time. And again, we're still negotiating, and Dr. Rufo's trying to be a little bit cagey because we don't want to give away our negotiating position in public here. And we'll, again, come back to you with our recommendations and our analysis in subsequent years. But I do think that given how expensive external busing appears to be becoming, that it is more likely than not that we will want to find ways of managing that cost by doing more of it in-house.
I guess I want to just weigh in on the reserve. The reserve process is not a mystery. It's completely transparent. And And my experience over the last 6 years has been that whenever we've had surplus, the board has to vote to replenish any of the reserves. So every step of the way, the board and the public has been completely made aware of all ins and outs of the reserves. So we're aware of the reserve balance. The reserve balances are audited. We vote on replenishing them every year. And my experience, again, as I brought up before, with long-term planning that Dr. Rufo does and Dr. Rogers, we've always been very conservative and prudent, and anytime we've had excess, we've replenished the reserves. So, plus these are taxpayer money, so we don't want to hold reserves if we don't have to. That's why I brought up the 4% amount. So we're very prudent over my experience. You guys have done a really good job, and I don't know of setting a percentage or a target. The numbers are the numbers. So when we have extra money, we fund the reserves. If we don't want, our goal is, from the board, is to keep our programs, keep our teachers, keep class sizes. Those have been the goals of the board, and I feel like the district has followed what we've directed them to do.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, so going back to the reserve, I hear different things from different people. And so in this case, I do agree that for my 8 years on the board, Dr. Rufo's team and Dr. Rogers' entire administration has been very transparent when it comes to the budget and the tax cap. And every year, we've been going under the tax cap. So I would recommend that Dr. Rufo's team and also Dr. Rogers continue to apprise the board as we go along, but instead of setting a target, we won't set a target. We'll just give them that flexibility and then have them report to us and report to the public that what we've been doing in the past. How do we feel about that? Okay. 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 All right. Are we all good? Okay. Thank you. Okay, so now we're moving on to audience to the public. So just please bear with me as I read this. The board values the community's input and provides opportunities to offer that input via email or in person. Persons who wish to speak during audience to the public must register online to speak in advance of the meeting by 5 p.m. the day of the board meeting. A link to the pre-registration form will be made available on the homepage on the district website 1 week before the meeting. Persons wishing to address the board in person during audience to the public must conform to the procedures adopted by the board. Speakers' remarks must conform to the following rules. 1, all speakers and observers are required to conduct themselves in a respectful and civil manner in accordance with rules set by the board.